Okay, so the pituitary and the hypothalamus are part of the master gland of the body. The pituitary has two lobes, the posterior lobe and the anterior lobe. Posterior lobe has reticulocytes, and they are partially nerve fibers. The anterior lobe is all glandular tissue. It's called the adenohypophyseal area, and they are just all glandular tissues that correlate with that nervous tissue in the posterior pituitary lobe. Posterior lobe is the growth of the hypothalamus nerve tissue. It comes off the hypothalamus and an extension of it, a bulging of the hypothalamus into this area, and its basic thing is with the oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone ADH. Those are the two main ones that I want you to remember for the posterior lobe of the hypothalamus pituitary. These neurohormones are transported to the posterior pituitary and released into the bloodstream for times of delivery and also for times of keeping the urine in the system. So we have two lobes. They look separate, but they are definitely connected. This diagram shows the areas in the brain that are stimulated by or stimulates down into the posterior lobe to secrete the oxytocin and ADH that is released into the bloodstream. The oxytocin courses down to the uterus, of course, and then the antidiuretic hormone goes down into the kidneys to create an environment of to keep the urine from being expelled out of the kidneys. Anterior lobe is a much more widespread and much more prolific lobe of the pituitary. It contains a hypophyseal portal system, which is basically a really good connection of blood vessels, and it regulates lots of functions in the body by secretion of these hormones directly into the bloodstream through this portal system. As we look at this diagram, we see that these different hormones are secreted by this lobe of the pituitary. We have the TSH, FSH, LH, ACTH, GH, and PRL. We'll go through each one of these as we go along, but to look at this, you'll see that there's information that comes from the hypothalamus, goes down into the pituitary, and it stimulates the production of these hormones in the pituitary itself. Now, most of these that are produced in the anterior pituitary are what they call tropic hormones that will stimulate other cells in the body to produce more hormones necessary for the metabolism of the body. So here's a list of those hormones that are produced in the anterior pituitary. There's growth hormone, which we designate as GH, thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, or we also call that thyrotropin. Then we have adrenocorticotropic hormones, ACTH, and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, luteinizing hormone, LH, and prolactin, which is called PRL. Now, all of our humans, males and females, have the same hormones, just in different levels. So as we'll see, we're going to see these hormones will be different in different age brackets and in different genders. So the anterior pituitary, their hormones are all proteins. They work on the cyclic AMP secondary messenger system. This is their target. They are called tropic hormones, and they regulate the secretion of other glands. Growth hormone. This produces what we call somatotrophins. They stimulate most cells of the body to increase your growth. Without this, your bones, your skeletal system will not grow. Decreased production of growth hormone will result in a short stature of humans, and we'll have a dwarfism apparent in those individuals. Growth hormone also promotes protein synthesis and encourages the use of fats for fuel. That's why a lot of people are using growth hormone these days to reduce the fat in their bodies and lose weight. And unfortunately, it gives them a condition, as we'll see later, called acromegaly, which is not a pretty sight for most people. Also, it affects the insulin factors that we'll see later. Growth hormone is regulated by growth hormone releasing hormone, GHRH, and growth hormone inhibiting hormone, GHIH. This is also called somatostatin. We need to keep our hormones in balance, and this is how we do it with the utilization of these different hormones. Now, we use these hormones in the production of cells, mainly in muscle cells, bone cells, but they also help to mobilize fat, elevate the blood glucose levels, and decrease blood glucose uptake. So what we're doing is dumping sugars into the system in order for our bodies to grow faster. They found that we grow more at night, and the factors that we need for growth is high protein diets, exercise, and lots of sleep. So those are the things that will make your kids grow faster and better. And nowadays, kids are more prone to sitting, not exercising, watching videos and TV, not sleeping, not active, and eating lots of carbohydrates. Those are the anti-growth hormone factors. They will stunt the growth of children faster than a good diet and good sleep. Hypersecretion of growth hormone will result in giantism. Now, most of us will only grow till about age 16 for females, and males about 19-20 years of age, and then after that we leave puberty, adolescence, and we run into adulthood. At that point, the epiphyseal plates at the bones will close. We do not grow any longer. We may grow bigger and broader in many different areas of the body, but we don't get any taller. If we continue to secrete growth hormone or secrete too much growth hormone, the epiphyseal plates will not close, and we continue to grow up into giantism, some up to 8 feet tall. Now, if this continues or this happens in adults, we end up with acromegaly, which is basically a broadening of the forehead, bigger face, bigger bones. I'll show you some pictures here in just a second of people with acromegaly. Basically, an Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone's look nowadays has a basic look of acromegaly. Hyposecretion in children results in dwarfism. If we don't secrete enough, the epiphyseal plates will close early, and the children will be short in legs and arms. The short stature is not due to genetics, but purely due to hormones. This is a picture of a female on acromegaly. See the broad face, big jaw, broad nose. Doesn't even hardly look like a female at that point. Here's the guy that was on Happy Gilmore and also on James Bond. He has a little bit of giantism and acromegaly going on in his body. He was very tall, and you look at his jaw and his forehead, very large boned person. Another one looks like a drill sergeant, very big jaw, broad forehead, somewhat of an acromegaly or a hypersecretion or a secretion of growth hormone in adults. A little picture, side picture of X-ray, where you see that the acromegaly almost looks like a X-ray of an ape with a bigger jaw and a bigger cranial wall. Growth hormone in excess can cause bigger muscles, bigger bones, but it also can have devastating effects on people's face and the way that they look. This person is probably on some type of steroid or growth hormone to increase the muscle mass and the bone mass of his body. But you can definitely see that he's got some growth hormones being pumped through his body to make his head and face so massively large. Now, Andre the Giant, he was a really nice person. They say he was one of the nicest people you'd meet, and he was very tall, and he created an empire because of his height. But he was suffering from giantism, and later on in life he died early. He had bad knees and heart disease that killed him. Here's a picture of a normal-sized female on the left and a giant problem on the right side. The female on the right is definitely much taller than the normal female on the left. Here's the males. On the left is a normal sized male. On the right we have a giant oversecretion of growth hormone. And then we have the little people, the dwarfism. They have smaller arms, smaller legs, body, torso, basically the same size, but just a short stature. Not hereditary whatsoever. Just another picture of a dwarf. Look at the size of the arms and the size of the legs. Just shorter stature, but the abdomen is still the same. Adrenocorticotropic hormones, or corticotropins. These are secreted by corticotropins of the anterior pituitary. They stimulate the adrenal cortex to release corticosteroids. Now these are important because corticosteroids are involved with the sugar imbalances of the system. They trigger the release of hormone of daily rhythms, and the internal and external factors such as fever, hypoglycemia, and stressors can alter the effects of this gonadotropins, releasing hormones. Gonadotropins, the follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, are secreted by the anterior pituitary. The follicle-stimulating hormones help to produce and stimulate the growth of the egg and the sperm. Now, luteinizing hormone basically is designed to mature the egg and the sperm after they've been released from the gametes production area in the testes and the ovaries. Now, up to the point of puberty, there is not really a production of a lot of androgens, or gonadotropins are not functional at that point, so the adrenals have to be functional and make this happen. In order for a male to become a male, they have to have testosterone produced at about 8 to 12 weeks of life, and at that point the little boys, little girls differentiate. Up to that point, the cells are pretty much the same in both males and females. The introduction of testosterone differentiates the males from the females, even though there are physically males, XY or XX chromosome. Prolactin is one that stimulates production in milk in females, not really common or not really high levels in males. If there would be a high level in males, it will leave the male impotent, unable to have children, and have problems with drive. So when we get the regulation of prolactin releasing hormones, it goes down and it stimulates the production of dopamine, and the blood levels rise towards the end of pregnancy, and then right about the time of pregnancy, between oxytocin and prolactin, we get this drop of, or this release of milk. Lactation begins, and the prolactin will start this. Oxytocin is the primary hormone that releases or lets the milk drop into the mammary glands. At that point, then prolactin takes over and keeps the production going. Suckling or nursing on the female mammary gland will increase the amount of prolactin produced by the anterior pituitary, and will continue the milk production. Also, along with that, an introduction of proper nutrients and some malt will actually help stimulate this production of milk. Some pictures of lactation. Okay, posterior pituitary. Not quite so in depth as far as the number of hormones that are produced. They contain axons, the hypothalamic neurons, and they store antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Antidiuretic hormone is just that. It's an antidiuretic. It keeps the body from expending or releasing too much liquids at any one time. It keeps you from becoming dehydrated. This is one of those factors that is, this is one hormone that is affected by alcohol. It will inhibit the antidiuretic hormone production, and it will cause increased diuresis, and you will become dehydrated. And that's why people with hangovers have headaches, and the next morning they are dehydrated and they need to replenish the antidiuretic hormone to take away the dehydration. These are all, both these antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin are nervous system stimulated to be released by the nervous system at the time of relaxation. Now, oxytocin is a hormone that is released and utilizes a positive hormone or a positive feedback mechanism. Once the baby starts coming, the oxytocin will keep being produced until that baby is born, and then it stops. It's a positive feedback mechanism. But the oxytocin actually goes through the bloodstream from the posterior pituitary, coursing through the capillaries around the uterus, and it'll enter the uterus, and it triggers the muscle contractions of the uterus to force the baby out of the womb. Also, it triggers the milk letdown, like we talked about just a few minutes ago. It plays a major role in sexual arousal and orgasm in males and females. Not much production in males, but a lot of production of oxytocin in females, especially during childbirth. Antidiuretic hormone, we talked a little bit about that. What it does, we pick up the amount of fluids that are in the system. If our bloodstream becomes a little bit dry, dehydrated, we'll start producing antidiuretic hormone from the posterior pituitary, and that in turn will shut down the urine production or urine formation, and we will retain fluids, keep them in our fluids to rebuild the blood volume levels that we need to create homeostasis. If solution concentration is low, antidiuretic is not released and we allow water loss. Now, alcohol inhibits antidiuretic hormone. It releases and causes copious urine amounts, as the book says, which means that you could wet your pants very easily if you're not careful. So too much alcohol, not a good thing. Dehydration. Now we have a condition called diabetes insipidus, which has basically the same look to it as diabetes mellitus. The only difference is that it's not diabetes mellitus. It is a problem with antidiuretic hormone deficiency. You get increased urine output and intense thirst. Now, we get, sometimes this can be caused from trauma or tumor cells, which can affect the antidiuretic hormone secretions. Thyroid is another gland that produces hormones, a very complex gland. The hormone of the thyroid is thyroxine, the main hormone, and it will affect every single cell in the body in some way, in some manner. It controls our metabolism and other aspects of our body also. We'll go through in just a minute. It's produced by the thyrotrophic cells of the anterior pituitary. It stimulates the normal development of the thyroid, and the thyroid produces what we call thyroxine. In order to do this, though, we have to have a connection between the two lobes of the thyroid. They create a colloid, which has thyroglobulin and iodine. It fills the lumen of the follicles, and it creates thyroid hormone. And the backside, we have the parafollicular cells that produce the hormone calcitonin. And calcitonin is the one, as you remember from our bone chapter, I hope you do remember, that we have situated, and it produces, that's the calcium from the bloodstream into the bones, whereas parathyroid hormone will take the calcium out of the bones into the bloodstream to keep the heart and the other muscles working properly. So between this and the parafollicular cells producing calcium and the parathyroid hormone being produced by the parathyroid glands, we will have a balance of calcium in our system. Now, if you notice, the colloid that we use to form thyroxine has iodine in it. In years past, when the Pilgrims and the pioneers came to Iowa, we had very lush, good soil, but it was very low in iodine. So these people would set up their houses and their farms in Iowa, and they would produce whatever they could as far as vegetables and fruit And unfortunately, those vegetables that they produced was low in iodine, and they ended up with goiters on their throats. We'll show you some pictures of some goiters coming up here in a few minutes. But basically, the thyroid continues to produce thyroxine even though there's not enough iodine for that production. So even though that it tries, it can't do it, so it keeps growing in anticipation of someday it'll grow big enough to produce enough thyroxine to satisfy the body. But in reality, it never does. It never gets enough thyroxine. So the thyroid has several different hormones that help to stimulate the production of thyroxine. We have thyroid stimulating hormone, and then we have thyroid releasing hormone, or thyrotropin releasing hormone. These hormones work together and is kind of a cascading effect and to create this thyroxine. Now, if we have too much thyroxine in the bloodstream, we inhibit the production of thyroid stimulating, thyroid releasing hormone, or thyrotropin releasing hormone, and those will then shut off the pituitary and the hypothalamus, creating a negative feedback mechanism that will balance out the levels inside the bloodstream. So here's a little chart. This hypothalamus will stimulate thyroid releasing hormone, stimulates the anterior pituitary, where it gets the tropic hormones, so we have the thyroid stimulating hormone, which in turn stimulates the thyroid gland, and that produces thyroxine, which goes to the target cells of the body. Now, if we have too much thyroid hormones, we go all the way back to the hypothalamus, restrict the production of the thyroid releasing hormone, and nothing happens. We have several different ways of balancing and creating a balance between those. This slide basically shows where the thyroid is in relationship to the trachea in the throat. Right below the Adam's apple, we'll find this nice little gland, and it is one that people can live without with the with the ingestion of some synthroid or some thyroxine, artificial thyroxine. So we actually have two compounds that we measure when we go to the doctor. We always talk about going to the doctor and getting your thyroid checked, where we have two substances, T4, which is thyroxine. It has two tyrosine molecules, which is an amino acid that we must get from our food, and is bound to 4 iodine atoms. Then we have T3, which is triiodothyronine, which has 2 tyrosines and 3 bound iodine atoms. These are a little bit different, but you notice on both of them they have this same component of iodine, which is very important for the production and the release of these. Now, thyroid hormone, or thyroxine, is the major metabolic hormone. It increases metabolic rate and heat production, calorigenic effect, and it plays a role in maintenance of blood pressure, regulation of tissue growth, just like it's an assisting hormone with growth hormone. It also develops the skeletal and nervous system. It helps to finish those off, and it makes it so that you are more alert and awake when we have proper amounts of thyroxine in the system. It also helps with reproductive capabilities. If estrogen and progesterone balances are off, it will affect the thyroid and vice versa. So if each side or one side of those equations is deficient, then the other side will be also deficient. Now, thyroglobulin is synthesized and discharged in the follicle lumen, and we have the iodine with it. This iodine is also released in lumen, and we also attach these to the tyrosine, and we get the thyroxine produced. So we either form T3 and T4, and they are released into the bloodstream, and at that point they go into the bloodstream and they affect the different organ systems. They go directly into the cells, and they can affect how the body works. This little diagram kind of shows how the thyroglobulin colloid comes together and forms the thyroxine, which is necessary for production. So we get the iodine, and we get the tyrosine from our diet, and they are put into the cell of the thyroid, and it creates this T3, T4. Both of the T3 and T4 bind to target receptors, but the T3 is 10 times more active than the T4. The peripheral tissues of this body convert T4 to T3, and so it's more active, so it's a better substance to be used by the body. Now, with thyroid hormone, we have hyposecretion in adults, gives a disease called myxedemia, endemic goiter, and it's due to a lack of iodine. I'll show you some pictures here in just a second. And we have hyposecretion in infants, which gives you cretinism. Yes, there are certain things people call cretins. When I was a kid, that was a derogatory term for people that were not very bright. But in this day and age, we realize that that's not politically correct, and we have true cretinism due to lack of thyroid hormone. Hypersecretion in adults gives us what we call Graves' disease, usually due to some type of a tumor or a growth in the thyroid area. Congenital hypothyroidism, decreased thyroxine. The infant suffers from bone development, thickened facial features, low temperature, lethargy, and brain damage. It's called cretinism. Myxedemia has, again, low metabolic rate. This is low thyroxine in adults. You'll see this a lot in, I've noticed it more in females than I do in males. There's sluggishness, sleepiness, weight gain, constipation, dry skin and hair. They have cold sensitivity, increased blood pressure, and tissue swelling. They put on quite a bit of weight because of the tissue swelling. An endemic goiter is enlarged thyroid gland due to iodine deficiency. And then we have toxic goiters from Graves' disease, which are basically antibodies against the system. And we get increased thyroxine and exophthalmosis. Here are some people with myxedemia. In a later life, myxedemia will come in, and you'll notice that some of these individuals, if we look at these, we can see the before picture here. This is before, and this is the after picture. And when we look at the before and after, look at the size. You got the double and triple chin here, more swelling on the sides of the face, receding hairline, loss of hair is very pathognomonic of too much thyroxine, or too little of thyroxine, excuse me. And the same way up here with this female. Look at the face features. She's putting on some weight on the face. The hair is receding back again and getting lighter and thinner. This person is just basically has several things going on at one time, but it's affecting the feet and the rest of the body altogether due to the fact that thyroxine is widespread and continues to affect every cell of the body that has a receptor for it. Here's another couple ones. These are some pictures of goiters. We'll go back to this one here, the young man with a goiter starting. Mostly third world countries. Picture B is related back here to the exophthalmosis with the Graves' disease. So we're getting some diseases here that are prevalent and more than others. Here's some more goiters, thyroid goiters, endemic goiters from lack of iodine. Third world countries, improper diet, no iodine present in the food sources, so the goiters, the thyroid continues to grow in hopes to produce enough thyroxine for the body, but in reality never does get that growth necessary for it. Some of these are very large goiters. Again, if they're not excised out and taken care of, they cause lots of problems in the neck, swallowing, even to the point of blood loss or pinching off the carotid arteries and causing some difficulties that way. Up in Mayo Clinic, there are huge containers full of these as big as basketballs from people, the pioneers coming across. And earlier years, before we realized that we needed to put iodine in our salt, we had problems, big problems with this type of deficiency. This is cretinism, some pictures of some kids that are cretinism. They have cretinisms, low hyperthyroxine production, low mental acuity, deficiencies in the size, born fairly normal, but as time goes on, they develop different diseases because of lack of thyroxine. Exophthalmosis, Graves' disease, kind of scary, where their eyes are poking out, bulging out, usually a bloodshot, having problems with thyroid, losing of hair, other factors along with it, but the eyes are definitely one of the main factors. Here, another one, hair loss due to hypothyroidism, especially in the crown of the head, loss of hair, especially in women who be brushing their hair, and the hairbrush is full of hair. It might be a good time to go get a thyroid check from your doctor. Calcitonin is one that we talked about already. It's an antagonist to the parathyroid hormone. It inhibits the osteoclast activity and release of calcium from the bone matrix. So it helps us to keep our bones so that they don't become osteoporosis, and it keeps the calcium that is in excess into the bones and not in the bloodstream. So the parathyroid takes the calcium out of the bone, and the calcitonin puts it back in. So basically the calcium uptake is incorporated into the bone matrix. It's all done by a negative feedback mechanism, and we also have to have vitamin D associated with this also. So intake of calcium is very important, but also the utilization of it. Without the acid in your stomach, you can't utilize the calcium, so hydrochloric acid is very necessary for the thyroid production of calcitonin and the effect of the calcium on the bloodstream to put the calcium back into the bones, necessary to keep us patent in our bones and not have osteoporosis. Parathyroid gland, they are produced by chief cells, and they secrete the parathyroid hormone, and this, the PTH, is most important of the two between calcitonin and PTH. PTH is the most important hormone for calcium homeostasis. These are just a few little glands embedded in the posterior part of the thyroid. As you'll see here, this is a posterior view of the thyroid, and it shows that the little glands are embedded into this thyroid. That's why they call it parathyroid off to the side, and they will produce the parathyroid hormone. And we talked about this already. Promotes vitamin D efficiency, helps reabsorb calcium from the kidneys. It maintains the calcium in the system. It also brings the calcium out of the bones for the heart to function properly. Hyperparathyroidism is fairly rare. It's usually due to a tumor. It's bones soften because we're pulling the calcium out faster than what we normally would because we have too much parathyroid hormone production. We're also making an osteoporotic, very soft, brittle bones that can break very easily. Hypoparathyroidism, following glandular trauma or removal, if we take out the thyroid, then we have to also be careful of the parathyroid. It will produce tetany, which is a shaking, the contraction of the muscles, respiratory paralysis, and dirt naps. Death. The adrenal glands. These are the fun little glands. This is the one most people have heard about in their years of life, where you have someone is washing dishes, and the guy's out there changing the oil in the car, and all of a sudden the jack slips out from underneath the car. The wife runs out, the baby on her hip, picks up the car, pulls the husband out, and saves his life. That's the old thing about the adrenal glands. They make you have superhuman strength and keeps you going very, very well, very revved up. They are basically two glands in one. We have the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex. The adrenal medulla is a gland that also is directly related and has nervous tissue in it, so it is a two-part complex aspect of the adrenals. It has sympathetic nervous system and the nervous tissue. Also, it's a hormonal regulating part of that gland. The adrenal cortex has 3 layers, and we'll talk about those in a second. They secrete minerals and corticosteroids. The adrenal cortex has the zona glomerulosa, and the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. The zona glomerulosa has mineral corticoids. The zona fasciculata has glucocorticoids, which are responsible for releasing glucose into the system. And then we have zona reticularis, which are our sex hormones. If the testes and ovaries are not functioning properly, these little cells will take over and produce the gonadotropins that we need to maintain our sex drive, and also the production of some estrogen and progesterone. This is just a diagram of the layers of the adrenals. They sit right on top of the kidneys, so they're called the suprarenals or adrenals, and they have the different zones here above the adrenal medulla, which is on the inside. Mineralocorticoids regulate the electrolytes, primarily the sodium and potassium. And if you remember right, the sodium and potassium are very important for nervous impulses and also keeping the cell membranes at resting potentials. The importance of the sodium affects the extracellular volume, the blood volume, blood pressure, and levels of other ions. The potassium helps us with resting membrane potentials of cells and action potentials in our nervous system. Now, aldosterone is the most important and most potent mineralocorticoid. It stimulates the sodium reabsorption and water retention by the kidneys, which means is that it creates an environment where we're reabsorbing the sodium. Now, when you reabsorb sodium, you also bring water back into the system, and that creates swelling. Estrogen will also accomplish this. In certain times of the month, certain females will increase the water retention and have difficulties with that due to sodium retention in the kidneys. Now, mechanism of aldosterone is fairly complex in that we have a hormone called renin-angiotensin mechanism. They have decreased blood pressure, stimulates kidney to release the renin. It triggers the formation of angiotensin II. This is a potent stimulator of aldosterone, and it will help make the aldosterone be released, and this in turn will create a retention of the sodium. We also have ACTH, causes small increases of aldosterone during stress. That stimulates the adrenals to work. And then we also have stimulation of the atrial natriuretic peptide, which blocks the renin and aldosterone secretion to decrease blood pressure. This is produced in the heart, by the heart, to locally modify and mediate the heart rates. We also have aldosteronism, which is hypersecretion due to adrenal tumors, which causes excessive sodium production. So we get excretion of the calcium, leading to abnormal function of the nerves and the muscles. So we lose the potassium. You see this quite often too in elderly, where they'll lose potassium in the kidneys, and they end up having situations where they're no longer in control. They have some dementia issues or apparent dementia issue. You put them in a nursing home, and they will eventually come out of it and function just wonderfully in a balanced diet where we can regulate potassium levels. So hypertension is definitely due to edema, due to sodium production by aldosterone. Now, the glucocorticoids or cortisol, you hear a lot about this on television nowadays. They keep the blood sugar levels relatively constant, and they maintain blood pressure by increasing the action of the vasoconstrictors. So they are responsible for sugar levels. Now on TV, they guarantee that you'll lose so many pounds if you will do this. This is part of your belly fat, and it is probably very true that if you find the right substance, you could release the fat out of the adipose cells. But I'm not sure of their quality of substances to do that. Cortisol is the most significant glucocorticoid. It does the most with the glucose. It promotes the rise in the blood glucose. It helps us to utilize our fatty acids and amino acids in energy production. So we have gluconeogenesis, which is a formation of fats and from glucose from fats and proteins. Now we take that glucose and we put it back into the glycolysis pathway, then through the Krebs cycle and ETS, and we get a lot of ATP out of that system. Hypersecretion of glucocorticoids. We have Cushing's syndrome. Depresses the cartilage and bone formation. It inhibits inflammation, depresses the immune system, and it promotes changes in the cardiovascular, neural, and in our gut, our gastrointestinal function. Now, signs and symptoms of Cushing's, we talked about the little girl that came into my office and actually had symptoms of Cushing's disease because of her pituitary was all messed up. He has a fatty hump between the shoulders, a round, kind of a moon face, pink, purple stretch marks on the skin. Looks just like they've ripped their skin and it's all colored. And then we have Cushing's syndrome that also results in high blood pressure, bone loss, and sometimes diabetes are associated with this system. And you can see this condition, a beautiful woman on the left, and after onset of Cushing's, the adrenal glands are being compromised. You get the buffalo hump on the back where the arrow is pointing, and the bigger moon face. And if you also look, you can see some changes in the hair and the width of the chest, bigger shoulders. She's putting on some weight other places also. More conditions, facial hair, stretch marks up here in the corner. We definitely have some areas here where we're losing patency of this tissue and we're getting some stretch marks. Again, this is the same person here, just different condition. And you'll see the stretch marks down here on these guys that have problems with Cushing's disease. Why? The adrenals are being compromised in some way, shutting down, not releasing the proper corticosteroids. Now, Addison's disease is a condition that we find also in the adrenals, and it gives, allows deficits in aminoglycocorticoids. It involves these aminoglycocorticoid deficits, decreases glucose and sodium levels. You get weight loss, severe dehydration, and hypotension. I had a friend of mine that he had Addison's disease, and he claims it was because he drank at least 13 cups of coffee a day. He had the most beautiful skin, very tan, and as you can see on these pictures, we have differences between these, the hands here. We have the darker hand on this side, and then we have the lighter skin over here, the darker on this side, and then we can see that the fingernails and the fingers are definitely darker in the Addison's condition. They have this glow about them. It looks like they've been on a beach for months, but in reality it's just a disease process that will eventually, in most people, cause deficiencies in sodium and potassium, and they also end up in the hospital quite often with high cholesterol issues. Gonadotropic corticotropic hormones, corticoids. We have, most of them are androgens. These are the male sex hormones. They convert them in tissues or cells, or estrogen in the females. So testosterone in males is very much more common, more elevated in males than it is in females, but both males and females have these hormones. If we increase, we rev up our number of or amount of hormones, we can increase the onset of puberty, and the appearance of secondary sex characteristics will appear, and we have increased sex drive. So this all starts pre-pubescity, and when we start with the adrenals, we'll produce a little bit of androgens, but once the puberty starts, the estrogen and progesterone are produced in the sex cells of the males and the females. Adrenal medulla has chromaffin cells. They secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. These hormones cause blood sugar rise, blood vessels to constrict, the heart rate to beat faster, blood pressure to go up, blood to be diverted to the brain, the heart, the skeletal muscle. It revs up your system. It makes you superhuman. It gives you strength and lots of energy. It creates ability to keep going longer than you normally would, and it's a stress, fight or flight hormone. This is the counterpart to the parasympathetic nervous system, or the sympathetic nervous system, excuse me. Epinephrine stimulates the metabolic activities, increases your bronchioles so that you can breathe better, increases blood flow to the skeletal muscles and the heart, and norepinephrine influences the peripheral vasoconstriction and blood pressure, increases your blood pressure so that your heart can function and push the blood around much faster. A tiny little gland that we see up inside the brain is called the pineal gland. It secretes melatonin, which is a byproduct or a derivative of serotonin, and melatonin affects the timing of your sexual maturity and puberty, your day-night cycles, and the physiological processes that show rhythmic variations, blood pressure, temperature, appetite, sleep. All these things are affected by the pineal gland. Now, some people take melatonin to help them to sleep, but sometimes it works for some and others it doesn't. The one problem with that is if you put melatonin in the system, the body may not want to produce melatonin after a while. Pancreas, triangular-shaped gland behind the stomach, retroperitoneal, has exocrine and endocrine cells. We have what they call the acinar cells, which are exocrine. They produce enzymes for food or digestive system. And then we have the pancreatic islets, the isles of Langerhans. These are endocrine, and they are producing the cells for sugar metabolism, the alpha cells and the beta cells. Alpha cells produce glucagon, which is a hyperglycemic hormone. Now, we call hyperglycemic means hyper is a lot, and glycemic or glyco is glucose. So it helps to produce glucose, and it puts glucose in the bloodstream. The beta cells, which produce insulin, help to drop or decrease the glucose in the bloodstream. So the glucagon increases blood levels of sugar, and the insulin drops the blood levels of sugar by helping the glucose get into the cells and to be utilized. Glucagon, its major target is the liver. It produces what we call glycogenolysis, and a breakdown of the glycogen to glucose. So we have some glycogen inside of our liver that we store, and this is for extra times when we need a little bit extra glucose. We also have a system that helps us with the gluconeogenesis, the synthesis of glucose from lactic acid and non-carbohydrates. So if you're working out at some point and you overdo it, you try to go too hard and too fast, the liver will help to convert the lactic acid back into a usable substance to go through the glycolysis pathways. So we want to release the glucose into the bloodstream, release the kraken so that we can keep our bodies going and run away from that grizzly bear if necessary. Now, insulin itself is a very big contributor to the production of taking the sugars out of the bloodstream and putting them into the cells. It helps to transport them across the cell membrane and it inhibits the glycogenolysis and the gluconeogenesis. It wants to use the sugars, whereas the glucagon, in fact, wants to store it. Insulin action on the cells, basically we're taking these glucose molecules and we're changing them into a cell that can, or a substance that can get across the cell membrane. So we're using, it helps with the catalyzation of and oxidation of the glucose for ATP production. We helps to take glucose into glycogen, and it also converts the glucose into fat. So a lot of people that have diabetes, they have problems with their insulin, are a little bit heavier than they should be because of the fact that we're converting glucose into fat for basically a storage facility. We just have too much glucose in our bloodstream. It's overflowing. We have too much, so we need to put it somewhere. We can't get rid of it. We can't burn it. It can't get into the cells to burn, so we store it as fat. The body doesn't know that we need to store that. We just keep storing it away. And that leads us to diabetes mellitus. It is a very common problem nowadays. There are 3 cardinal signs. We have polyuria, polydipsia, which is excessive thirst, and then we have polyphagia, which is excessive hunger and food consumption. And this is how it works. When you eat sugars, when you eat something that has lots of sugar in it, it goes into your stomach, it goes in the small intestine, it's absorbed back into the system, it goes into the bloodstream, and then it will flow around the bloodstream. The heart will pump it around, keeps pumping it until something pulls it into the cells. It's too big to go into the cells by itself. So the insulin kind of grabs hold of it and helps it to get into the cells. Its function is to help transport it through the cell membrane so that we can get it into the mitochondria, the cell itself, and produce ATP. Now, if we don't have that insulin in there, it just keeps floating and floating and eventually be dumped into fat, and we just don't get anything out of it. We're constantly being hungry because we're not getting any ATP. The body says we're low on ATP. Please send down some more sugar, eat some more, so that we can get some energy. We're tired, we need some energy. Now, if we have hyperinsulinism, that's when we have too much insulin. Maybe someone has given themselves a shot of insulin when they really didn't need it. This can cause hypoglycemia, which is too little sugar in the system, disorientation, unconsciousness. You have to give them something like a pop or some juice, something with lots of sugar in it to exchange this back so that we don't get too far down. Without enough sugar in the system, we utilize it all up, the brain will pass out because of lack of ATP. So we need to keep that going. Now the ovaries and the placenta also are responsible for production of hormones. Ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. They're responsible for the female reproductive organs, the maturation of those, making sure that they are developed properly. The appearance of the secondary sex characteristics, breast development, cyclic changes in the menstrual cycle, uterine mucosal changes on a monthly basis. These are all changed because of stimulation of the ovaries by the follicle-stimulating and luteinizing hormone that we get from the anterior pituitary. The placenta secretes estrogen and progesterone and human chorionic gonadotropins, HCG, and that's the hormone that we detect on our pregnancy tests. So they're all related closely together, and without, if one is off, then the rest of them also is off. We'll talk more about that in the last chapter on AMP2. Testes also produce testosterone. Remember that testosterone is also produced in females, not in very much quantities, but it's still produced. Initiates maturation of the male reproductive system, gives us secondary sex characteristics. It helps stimulate the production of sperm and maintains the reproductive organs and keeps them functional. Testes will produce testosterone. Males will produce it throughout their lives and produce sperm as long as they live, constantly. Other hormones, we have the heart, we talked about a little bit earlier, atrial natriuretic peptide, NAP, is produced at the heart, the tip of the heart, and it helps with blood pressure, blood volume, blood concentrations. The gastrointestinal tract also has some that produce gastrin, which stimulates the release of hydrochloric acid, and the hydrochloric acid in turn helps us to digest our foods and assimilate our calcium necessary for proper muscle contractions. Secretin stimulates the liver and pancreas, helps to create the liver to work properly to form the bile, and the pancreas also to form its digestive hormones, digestive juices for breaking down foods. Cholecystokinin stimulates pancreas, gallbladder, and hepatopancreatic sphincter, and this dumped in this area, it helps to dump all the digestive juices into our small intestine so we can digest the foods properly. Kidneys produce erythropoietin, which increases the amount of red blood cells that we have, and also renin is initiated in the renin-angiotensin mechanism and our aldosterone mechanism of sodium retention. Skin helps with cholecalciferol and precursor of vitamin D, of course. So skin, even though it doesn't seem like it would be an organ, it is the largest organ of the body, so it does have some productive capabilities with vitamin D. Adipose tissue produces a substance called leptin. It's involved in appetite control. So if you are putting food away as fat, your adipose cells should produce leptin that will tell you not to eat anymore. So some of these products on TV claim that they've created leptin and that will help you to control your appetite. If they have in fact done that, that's a good way of creating appetite control. The skeletal system, the osteoblasts, we have osteocalcin. They divide and secrete more insulin and improve glucose handling and reduce body fat. And then we have the thymus, which produces thymolin, thymopoietins, and thymosins, which are involved in the normal development of T lymphocytes. These are the ones that make the T lymphocytes immunocompetent, and we'll talk about that again in AMP2. Hormones are produced from all three germ layers. We can affect the hormones by too much pesticides, industrial chemicals, arsenic, dioxin. It will mess you up. There was a place that had dioxin and it messed up the fertility. There's a lot of birth defects. Water pollution, all these things can mess up your hormones. Other types of pollutants can also affect the sex hormones, causes a disruption of things, even the not eating enough or over-exercising can affect the sex hormones because of lack of fats that are necessary to produce the steroid hormones that we need. Interference with the glucocorticoids may help explain high cancer rates in certain areas. It can be a problem in that way. Ovaries, now they don't start to develop until puberty. Up to this point, the estrogen and progesterone are produced in the adrenals, and once the puberty strikes, the ovaries will kick in and they increase the estrogen and they go through the changes into adulthood. Testosterone also diminishes with age, but the effect is not usually seen until very old age. And now with the cases of Cialis and Viagra and some of these effects are even delayed or curtailed because of these medications. But in reality, the testosterone will stay fairly level up till about age 85, and then it starts dropping fairly drastically. But males have still been able to father children way, way late into their ages, their old age. Growth hormone decreases about the same time. We get muscle atrophy. Some people like our Stallone has been taking growth hormone He was caught with it, I think, at one point, and now he's they watch him for that. But he was just using it to trim down and to cut weight and to get bigger and reverse the muscle atrophy that he was having. Thyroxine decreases with age, lowers your metabolism, PTH drops, and we get or increases the bone deposition into the circulatory system, and we get bone demineralization, osteoporosis effects. And that's the end of that for Boyer AMP1 class. Thank you.